let's start the show. It's kind of funny how this YouTube show is becoming personal to me. I mean, don't get me wrong. The fact that I don't have the ability to do this full-time greatly limits what subject matter I can cover. If I'm going to spend my own money on things, then odds are they're probably not going to suck. The year was 2007. I had moved back to my hometown of Burlington, Ontario to finish the last 2 years of high school and was confused as to where my life was going. In March of that year, the Canadian version of MTV, Much Music, decided to showcase something completely out of their wheelhouse. An anime. This might seem minuscule since anime is more widely accepted now, but back then, you would have been bullied if you deviated from the norm. In my youthful naivete, I thought the show had something to do with the music artist known as Beck, since the success of his album Wero was still recent, and he was weird enough to try something like this. Kind of like Daft Punk with Interstellar 5555, and Jackie Chan with Jackie Chan Adventures. After watching a single episode, I was proven severely wrong and became hooked. So tune up your instruments and switch the amps to standby. After years of holding back, it's time to finally review Beck, Mongolian Chopsquad. Beck, Mongolian Chopsquad is a 2004 anime directed by Osamu Kobayashi and animated from Studio Madhouse. It was produced by Takashi Shukuri and Yoshimi Nakajima. Beck tells the story of Yukio Tanaka, aka Koyuki, a directionless middle school kid with no drive who is essentially watching his life pass by as opposed to living the way he wants. After saving a dog from being abused, Koyuki befriends his owner Ryusuke. Ryusuke invites Koyuki to a concert he's playing with his band Serial Mama. That concert doesn't go according to plan, as Serial Mama implodes after the show, and Ryusuke is left bandless, bitter, and yet emboldened by the collapse. What Koyuki doesn't realize is he's about to go down a rabbit hole of music where he'll meet interesting people, grow as a person, and eventually find his own voice. Some of the people he'll encounter are the Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers inspired bassist Taira Yoshiyuki, Chiba Tsunemi, who was modeled after Zack De La Rocha from Rage Against the Machine, Yuji Sakurai, aka Saku, who becomes the drummer, Ryusuke's younger sister Maho, and Mr. Saito, who is the stereotypical perverted old man who teaches Koyuki guitar and was a former Olympic swimmer. Let's dive in. Koyuki is by all accounts a perfect avatar for the audience. He's a kid that isn't wild or crazy and is just trying to find his place in the world. When I was in high school, I was able to put myself in his shoes since I was in the mindset of trying to figure out what I was going to do after high school. As an adult, though, it's very hard for me to take him seriously since he was going through this mindset in fucking middle school. From this discovery, everything starts to slowly crumble from a North American perspective. Outside of reality and talent shows, what rock clubs allow people below the legal drinking age to perform there? Slim to nil is most likely the answer. Granted, I don't know what the mentality is for those in the Japanese public school system, but a lot of the story falls apart when you start to really think about it. Also, there's a part in the show where Koyuki is being chastised because he's spending more time in the band than focusing on his grades. He winds up in the same high school as Chiba, which, in the manga, is alluded to being not reputable. Before he winds up there, Koyuki's middle school bullies sign him up for a gauntlet of events at the local swim meet, to which he blows the competition away. You mean to tell me no one is jumping at the chance to sign a potential swimming prodigy to their high school? I'm sorry about this, but it's been bothering me for way too damn long. Yuji Sakurai, aka Saku, is Koyuki's classmate and eventually the drummer for Beck. Frankly speaking, Saku is the most genuine, nice character in the entire show. From the moment he meets Koyuki, he is someone of honesty and integrity. He's a humble and kind person and someone I'd love to have in my corner. Ryusuke Minami is the rock star guitarist slash de facto manager of the group. He's very blunt, cold, and occasionally does some really hurtful things to some of the other members in the group. I get the fact that he comes around, but he has no excuse for how he acts, especially towards Chiba. Taira Yoshiyuki is the bassist. He's unnervingly calm, but has the skills to back it up. Dare I say, he's probably the one who would be the most stable if the band called it quits. Seriously, he's in that high demand. Personally, I was surprised how incredibly relaxed he is considering how his playing style and appearance say the opposite. At first I didn't even think it was possible to meet such a relaxed musician, and then I hired a bassist who is exactly like that. Chiba Tsunemi, in my opinion, is one of the best characters in the entire show. Dude is brimming with personality, and pretty much devours the scene. Funny thing is, he's introduced as some random guy and then promptly jump kicks into our hearts. Before I continue, a lot of these character critiques will have a giant asterisk next to them, and I'll explain at the end of the character section. Maho Minami is Ryusuke's kid sister, who, just like Chiba, has an amazingly exuberant personality. If you piss her off, she'll tell you to go f*** yourself and then proceed to kick your ass. She's not as emotionally strong though, and actually holds back her insecurities behind her aggressive front. Earlier I mentioned how some of the characters have a giant asterisk next to their name, and that's because the character's likability depends on who is voicing them. In the subs versus dubs category, my favor is overwhelmingly leaning towards dubs. Funimation was in charge of the North American distribution, and the people they got nailed most of their acting parts. That being said, not all of the series was flawless. I noticed some of the occasional lines from Eric Vale as Ryusuke, Jerry Jewell who voiced Taira, and Colleen Clickenbeard who voiced Izumi Ishiguro that came across as incredibly flat. It took me out of the episode and made me question if they didn't have a better vocal take they could have used. What helps make the English dub work is something that I touched on very briefly in my review of Wanna Be the Strongest in the World. As a native English speaker, I can say when you have an older actor portraying a youthful character, it can drastically alter the perception of the character. Where Wanna Be the Strongest in the World's voice dub ages the characters enough for it not to sound like they're over-sexualizing underage people, Beck's English voice cast ages the characters to sound like they're in their mid to late teens. This helps makes their plight as struggling musicians more believable, since being a struggling musician in middle school shouldn't really be a thing. What are you trying to be? Baby metal? Standouts for the English dubbing are Brina Palencia as Maho and Justin Cook as Chiba. They were perfectly cast, although only Justin Cook wasn't using his actual speaking voice. He had to perform and act in character, and I'm applauding the effort. Greg Ayers voices Koyuki, and he does a good job on the acting portion. I'll dive into this a little later in the video. Trust me, there's more on this. It has been quite a long time since I've watched Beck Mongolian Chopsquad, and holy crap did the visuals not age well. Now, you are currently watching the footage on 360p, because I'm too poor to upgrade to Final Cut Pro X. I own the DVD box set, and watching it on modern day TV is kind of rough. That being said though, there's a problem when those on the Funimation commentary track mention how the crowd animation looks like it was taken out of Shin-chan. The cast and crew for the English dubbing are honestly doing my job for me. I noticed in the first episode some of the animation was so janky I thought I was watching Squiggle Vision. Seriously, look at Maho from episode 2. How pressed for budget were you to the point where you couldn't animate any more frames? Oh, and here's a scene where it wipes from the subway to Ryusuke's hand-drawn map. It's really jarring. I don't know why you just wouldn't decide to cut it instead. I mean, normally, there's an audio cue to assist the smooth transition of a wipe cut, which helps the viewer realize time has passed. It's an unwritten rule of video editing that I've noticed. Speaking of janky, there are times where certain characters in a scene look a little off kilter. Luckily though, when it comes to musical performances, the animation flows well. Sometimes they'll use cel-shaded animation to focus on the instruments being played. It looks really good despite the fact the audience will barely notice it. You can make the argument that so long as an anime hits the important scenes, you can forgive the janky animation. While that might be a solid point, keep in mind, Beck was animated by Studio Madhouse, who are responsible for animating series like Trigun, Perfect Blue, Death Note, One Punch Man, Black Lagoon, which is a favorite of mine, and the visually stunning film Paprika. When you compare their previous work, it really makes you wonder what the f*** happened? When people ask me, how would you describe Beck? I would tell them that while it's got elements of romance and true crime, more on that later, it is primarily an anime about music. So, is the music in the anime about music any good? Yeah, it does the trick. There were a lot of Beck Mongolian Chopsquad style music that was given out as a promotion for the manga. Grateful Sound, Tribute to Beck, contains 10 tracks from a bunch of Japanese bands from the 90s. This stuff wasn't used in the anime, but I want to use it to illustrate that Beck bleeds music. The opening and closing themes of Beck Mongolian Chopsquad are fantastic tracks that are only somewhat held back by the animation going into it. The Beat Crusaders Hit in the USA is a straight-up banger that gets you intrigued while the animation tries to slam as much American-style imagery as possible. The only problem is, the band spends essentially the entirety of the show in Japan. Once again, I really like the song, but are you telling me there isn't another Beat Crusader song that you could have used instead? The outro is My World Down by Meister, and it's a song that, still blows my mind even to this day. The visuals of various rock and roll groups blends perfectly with the music provided by the alter ego of Ryo Matsui. It's a song that, in all honesty, I would kill to make something even remotely close to the same vein as it. It's the perfect mix of British and Japanese style rock that is downright shocking when I tell my friends that it was a Japanese person singing the vocals. When it comes down to Beck, you have to ask yourself, what version of the show's music would you like to listen to? The original Japanese dubbing has 2 soundtracks currently available to the general public. The Beck album, which is essentially a combination of the Japanese rock band Beat Crusaders working alongside the cast, and the Keith album, which has some new music as well as the original drafts of some of the music used in the show before the cast redubbed it. According to the music director, and technically the ADR for the localization of Beck, Mike McFarland, when Funimation got their hands on the music, they found that there was no instrumental versions for the English dub cast to dub over. With that, Funimation had to make a decision as to what they were going to do. Have the entirety of the show dubbed with the English cast and then use the original Japanese recordings during the music performance portions, or decide to spend extra money for multi-track recordings of the songs along with the English voice cast. While it was the more costly option, McFarlane decided to do what I consider was the right option: spend the money and record the songs. Cause imagine the uncanny valley factor that would have happened in watching the English dub only to transition to the Japanese cast trying to sing the English music. Rather than deciding to completely translate the lyrics, McFarlane chose to instead rewrite the lyrics so that they would match up phonetically. In doing so, the songs took on new meanings from the Japanese originals. As a songwriter and lyricist myself, this is a tricky problem because a straight translation might sound off when translated, but if you decide to rewrite so it'll flow better, you run into the risk of losing the original intent behind the song. Going off of my own experience, I personally have gotten into arguments with former band members who wanted to alter some of my lyrics. They wanted to make something that would have been more commercially acceptable, and I wasn't willing to compromise. It's a risky gamble that McFarlane did, and luckily, in my opinion, it paid off. Well, mostly. Greg Ayers, who does the voice of Koyuki, had some minor disadvantages which I feel held him back during the recording process. You see, Greg grew up performing live music on stage throughout his life, but had very limited experience when it came to recording in the studio. As far as I know, it was his first time doing that kind of work. Not only did he have that going against him, he also has sinus allergies which, according to the commentary track, was impacting his vocal performance. When I hear Greg's voice on the music sections, I keep thinking that he's holding back. He's a good actor for Koyuki, but the quality of his singing doesn't completely feel like how the character should sound. I can already feel the hate mail I'm going to get for that last section. Well, I knew what I was signing up for when I decided to follow this path. Let's continue. One of the songs that was absent from the English version happens to be a cover of the Beatles' hit song, I've Got a Feeling. Apparently the bureaucratic red tape needed to use it was way too much for the English localization. So what Funimation did instead was create a Frankenstein's monster of a song. They basically combined parts of a pre-existing original song, 50 Cent Wisdom, and put it over an instrumental that somehow sounds similar to I've Got a Feeling. Just, not so similar that Funimation gets in legal hot water. Personally, I am apathetic in regards to this decision, because while I enjoy the Beatles, I also feel that Koyuki better utilizes the spotlight with the original. The first volume of Beck was released in 1999 by Harold Sakushi and was published by Kodansha. As a result of this manga being made in the 90s/early 2000s, Beck unfortunately ends up dating itself. As a result of online media streaming and digital downloads, the entire music scene has drastically changed. Some might argue not for the better. To have a story that deals with the music industry but misses an event which permanently changed it is incredibly unfortunate. But I digress. The anime lasts only 26 episodes and ends on a fairly good note. However, it's incredibly rushed. There's a lot of exposition that is dumped upon the viewer, which caused me to get curious and pick up the manga. I wanted to know how things clicked in that final episode and possibly to see how the entire story ends. First things first, let's talk about the artwork. The manga has a drawing style that reminds me of some of the shoujo romance stuff I've read. I'm a very lonely man, don't judge me. One thing I need to say is that Koyuki is kind of pathetic in the manga. He doesn't stand up for himself really, and as a result is constantly treated like shit by people in his life. I'm just gonna ask, how does Koyuki not snap and beat the ever-loving crap out of Yoshihito? The manga also has some needless side characters which don't really go anywhere. I don't know if that's a possible side effect of writing as you go along, or if that's just how slice of life themed content works. After reading the entirety of the manga, I somewhat think it was a good idea to end the anime roughly where they did because the story goes completely off the rails later on. Rather than deciding to follow Beck struggling to make it as an establishing band, the manga decides to practically switch genres into that of a crime drama. This is in order to drive up the tension going towards the end. Since they already did this gambit earlier in the story, the second attempt loses its luster. Basically, you're taking the gamble with the Grateful Sound Festival and then doing the exact same thing on a larger scale with the Avalon Festival. Consider this from the perspective of an actual musician, but there's a lot that goes into being a struggling band in the music industry. It feels disappointing that the fundamental setting and themes take a backseat to what is essentially the plot equivalent of a record skipping. Not only that, but in losing its focus, Beck loses its grip on reality. Ryusuke Minami, by all accounts, should be dead. Considering the people Ryusuke makes deals with, why would they have any reason to actually make good on their side of the bargain if they lose? These are the types of people who are incredibly dangerous. In both film and real life, people like Ryusuke wind up dead. In my opinion, Beck would have disbanded if they were a band in real life. There's way too much tension that they wouldn't be able to keep it together. Hell, if you updated the setting into the modern world, things would have been even worse for them. In 2010, a Beck live-action movie was made, and it's a complete and utter dumpster fire. It was less than 5 minutes into the film for me to not only feel disgusted, but utterly insulted in its direction. Instead of a well-directed film that takes the subject matter seriously, Beck became camp, and its quality devolved into a level that is normally reserved for live-action kids sitcoms. Just look at the intro scenes where Koyuki gets bullied. Who acts like that? Whoever it is, they aren't human. Also, get this. Ryusuke accidentally turns off a power bar on the stage and it affects the entire club? No sound person worth their salt would have all those instruments plugged into one single power bar. Not just to prevent the stupidity that happens in the live-action film, but also because in real life, it would overload the circuit and possibly trip a fuse. Also, why is Maho eating an apple at the concert? What, you're trying to make her stand out from all the other boring extras? If you're doing that, guess what? You failed in making an actually interesting character. The live-action film was directed by Yukihiko Tsutsumi, and while I haven't watched enough of this man's work to critique him as a filmmaker, I do have to ask, what the f*** were you thinking? I just can't. This film apparently won a Japan Academy Prize for the music done in it, but it still doesn't change the fact that it does a massive disservice to the source material. Harold Sakawishi quite clearly wanted to tell this story, and despite it kinda losing its luster in the manga format, you can at least tell that the dude has a respect for music. It also helps that almost every chapter begins with a rendition of an album cover. Personally, Beck Mongolian Chopsquad is one of the reasons why I decided to pursue music and continue to do so over a decade later. The first guitar riff I ever learned was 50 Cent Wisdom. Hell, my Epiphone Sheridan is nicknamed Maho. Beck Mongolian Chopsquad came out at the right time for it to gain traction in North America. Some musicians I've met in Toronto were inspired by it, and I think that should be a sign of its legacy as a good show. While it is somewhat dated, the English dubbing is fantastic, and I strongly recommend you check it out. I'm SonicMTD, and if you really wanna fly, you gotta let go. This video was proudly supported by Unsung Heroes of Patreon.
Hey, it's been a while.
Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Tyler DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD. Thank you so much for catching the second episode of my second season of Always Right Reviews, where we reviewed Beck Mongolian Chopsquad, aka Beck. Please be sure to like and subscribe this video, and leave me a comment in the comments down below. Regardless of what it is, I always take a look at it, and I could always use some feedback to improve my craft. If you look up here on the webpage, you'll see whatever YouTube recommends that you watch, and down here is going to be an entire playlist of my series Always Right Reviews. So if this is your first episode and want to see how I've grown, please be sure to take a look at that. Either way, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. My name is Matthew Tyler DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD. Arigato gozaimasu, and later days.何